this business of water as a flux is a hot topic, hot emerging topic. You want to get involved in that. So, start wrapping up. The key message is we need to start changing our behavior from being a consumer of water that discards it as waste to becoming a custodian of water that borrows it from the system and returns it back for reuse thereafter. And I think there are 10 values, 10 core values we have to start inculcating. I'll share those with you now. First thing is respect. We believe we are masters and owners of nature. René Descartes told us that. The Judeo-Christian Bible tells us that. So we believe we are masters and owners of nature. So let's accept we are, but let's at least respect. The second thing is reduce. How do we reduce the volume that we need? For example, how do we improve our efficiencies? How do we reuse it? Water as a flux, and every one of you people can in fact start looking at this recycling at home. If you can recycle your own water in your own space at least 1.6 times by the year 2030, you're making your contribution. How do we recycle? Water of different quality at different cost for different purposes. You heard Helen Ziller this morning talk about the stupidity of flushing toilet water with potable grade water. So in the future, we're going to see what I call a dual stream reticulation economy, where water of different quality is used for different purposes. We're going to renew it. Nature, that wetland I was telling you about, nature is our friend, not our foe. We have to work within those constraints. When I grew up in the Okavango Delta, that's what I learned, that I'm part of nature. How do we regenerate them? How do we reinvigorate these things? And of course, more importantly, how do we restore things? And aquatic ecosystems provide useful goods and services. The previous speaker mentioned just that. Okay, so with that, I would like to hand the baton over to you. There are 3 numbers. Please remember them: 48, 38, 63. You burn those into your hearts. Start figuring out how to do something clever with that. I cannot carry on any further. Albert Einstein told us that the level of ingenuity needed to solve a problem exceeds the level of ingenuity that created the problem in the first place. So by definition, only we can do it collectively. But thank you very much. And I just might add that that is a little project I've been busy with the last 10 years. I've been restoring frogs back into the wetland system of this radioactive landscape in which I live. And it's taken me 10 years to get a productive pair to do what it is that nature said they must do. Not been very easy, but nonetheless, it's very difficult to restore some things that are damaged. Thank you very much. Please remember those 3 numbers. Thanks.
Welcome. Gosh, what an honour to be here today, to be speaking after Alderman Walker and Premier of the Western Cape. My goodness, she certainly calls a spade a spade. Value that kind of practical thinking. Right. I think you will agree with me that largely I'm speaking to the converted. And our task, I think, is to be able to find ways of getting the message across to those who probably most need to hear what we are trying to speak about, what we are trying to instill regarding the need to change our particular attitudes to not only to the way that we deal with the environment, but most importantly, because it's such a big part of my presentation today, as to how we actually look at ourselves. The wind one day and day called to my soul with the odor of jasmine. In exchange for the odor of your jasmine, I would like the odor of your roses. I have no roses. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Well then, I will take the withered leaves and the yellow petals and the waters from your fountain. And the wind left, and my soul wept and said, "What have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you?" And the wind left, my soul wept and said, "What have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you?" Antonio Machado, the author of that poem, is speaking to you, you know her. He's speaking to every one of us. Now, this picture here was taken by James Lovell. He was one of the astronauts in the holding vehicle as 2 of his colleagues explored the moon. It was taken back in the 1970s. And he was under strict instructions that he would be taking photographs of the moon, pictures, movies of the moon. Nothing else. He had to concentrate on that. And while he was doing this, something kept catching his eye, and he looked up, and he saw this. And there's an old story which says it's better to ask forgiveness than it is to ask permission. But he took his camera and took a picture of the Earth's rise. And then he did something profound. He put out his thumb, and he said to himself, you know, behind my thumb is all the known life in the known universe. Behind my thumb. What on earth is going on down there? Right, do I press this to that or to that? There you go. So the big question is, who in fact looks at who in this particular equation? Who is this human animal? How do we relate to fellow creatures? And by the way, it's in this light that I would like to say that the word Ubuntu, this beautiful mantra that we have in our country, because of you I exist, can no longer be confined just to the human species. We have to be able to look at everything around us, from the trees, to the skies, to the landscapes, and to be able to say with absolute passion, because of you I exist. And so, we start looking at the similarities between human beings and between what we often refer to as aspects of nature. And what I would like to be able to show you, so these are not just aspects of nature, these are great conditions for our existence. The existence, for example, of trees. Well, we all know, of course, that trees and plants are responsible for photosynthesis, but let me tell you a few more things about trees. Trees and plants have the five senses, exactly the way that we have our five senses. What is important here is to remember, of course, that trees don't have noses, they don't have ears, they don't have eyes, and even their tongues to taste. But the chemical reactions which take place in the human body are identical to the ones which take place in plants. So, for example, we know that trees can see, plants can see. They can tell the difference between blue light and red light. They can tell the difference between close red and distant red. And the way they do this, of course, is they pick up through photoreceptors in the leaves and in the greenery to be able to tell when it's time to literally switch off, when it's time to photosynthesize. We know, for example, that trees can smell. All you have to do is just do a survey of trees where one particular tree of a similar species is being invaded by caterpillars. What will happen then is the tannins will rise in that tree, and before long, the wind will take the pheromones of the tannins to the next tree, which will then produce excess tannins, which make those leaves unpalatable to caterpillars. And the same would happen with browsers such as kudu and giraffe. So we know that they can smell. We know that they can taste. And the way we do that is because the root systems taste the seasons. They literally pick up when there's going to be sufficient or insufficient water and send signals through the roots to other trees of a similar species. We know they can hear through exquisite chemical changes which occur when the bumblebee flies past flowering plants. What is this about? This is about, for me, a very, very sobering realization, probably one of the most important of the scientific discoveries that I know in recent years, is the fact that every human being, every living thing on this earth is bound by a common language of DNA. Do you know that every mammal, every single mammal from mice and polecats to porcupines, all the way through to leopards, lions and gorillas and chimpanzees has more than 90% of the human genome. More than 90%. And we can build a sigh of relief and say, well, thank heavens, we're related to the mammals, but hang on. There are birds, which clock in at about 88% of the human genome. Crocodiles at about 86%. Flies at about 43%. Right? Fungi, a little bit of athlete's foot that you sometimes see between your toes. 22% of the human genome. All the way down to plants, where plants have about 10 to 15% of the human genome. So we are bound by a common language of DNA, and as I say, it means that Ubuntu is a case of also saying that because of you I exist. There's that deep, deep biological relationship between us and all these living forms. But as we look around ourselves, and I want you to be able to do this, just practice this, You look at a number of trees over here. Well, but what am I trying to say? What I'm saying is this, that in the naming of the trees, if you understand the trees, for example, you will immediately discover that you are living in a field of information. And that information here is very much the information as to how far you are from water. Every one of those trees that I've mentioned has a particular distance away from water. So if you were blind, for example, and somebody had to say to you, there's a Clotomegalobopteris, a female berry, right over there, you could still look back, I'm very, very close to water. If I said to you, there's Phragmites australis, this grass growing here, it grows in the water. So you're in the water. And this is what it means to be living in a field of information, seeing how we relate to all of these. This is part of the blind spots. We tend to look at nature as aspects of our lives. We have to be able to make that shift of looking at nature as this is a condition for my life and particularly, speaking with a psychiatric cap, for my psychological well-being. And so, we start looking at trees a little differently. But what else does it tell us? It tells us there are certain birds that enjoy certain trees. So, for example, a red-eyed bulbul versus a black-eyed bulbul. The black-eyed bulbul, you know you're close to water again. Red-eyed bulbul, you're getting much, much further towards the sandy areas. And so we look at the external environment just a little differently, but on the basis that we're living in this field of information. And so we ask the question in terms of the blind spot. What is this blind spot? What is this resistance that makes us see human beings as special as we sometimes like to think we are? There is no doubt about it, ladies and gentlemen, that we are the apex predator. There's no getting away from that. But we're not the apex of creation. We are not what we call in wilderness terms a keystone species. Basically, a keystone species is a species that if we do without that particular species, everything else collapses. And that's rather a sobering thought. Get rid of human beings and the world will get on very well without us. So the blind spot that we want to address here is this amazing inability, this amazing resistance to see ourselves as being utterly interdependent on everything that is around us. And therefore, what is it that takes us on this shift from the plant, insect, animal world into this particular species here? Well, I would like to have a look at human behavior in this light, and maybe to have a look at the brain of this particular individual over here. This is my brain. I mean, anybody in the world who doesn't like spaghetti, but it is something like that. But looking at the difference between human beings and all other living species, and particularly just for the morning session here, is to see this in terms of mammals. The one thing which sets us apart neuroanatomically is this incredible brain. The size of this brain, the wiring of this particular brain, and what it is that allows us to be human animal. Well, the brain is roughly divided up into 3 different areas. It's divided up into a basic brainstem area over here. It's divided up into a middle area over here, which is where a lot of the what we call the diencephalic emotion centers are housed. And then this astonishing area over here, what we call the cortex, and particularly the frontal cortex, which is large in our particular species. And it's the frontal cortex that accounts for human personality. It is the frontal cortex that allows for human beings to reflect. It is the frontal cortex which allows us to talk about yesterday, today, and tomorrow in that kind of sequence. It's a very, very powerful gift. Now, the model which I want you to have a look at, because it is sobering, is the model which was introduced by a fellow called Paul McLean in the late 1970s, early 80s. And I can promise you, when this was announced, it did not come with red carpet treatment. And I want you just to think about this, because this is a model. If we acknowledge that we are biologically bound to all living things, then we have to consider a massive ancestry of life on Earth where we are a form and an expression, a reflection of life which has gone before us. If you do an analysis of the brain of a crocodile, for example, the crocodile has everything that the human brainstem has. Yes, it has an emotional system as well, but it's much less than humans. Yes, it has a cortex, but it's a very, very thin layer of cortex. So, looking at this particular creature over here, we will see, and we need to see in ourselves, that we are a triune species. We are biological, we are social, and we are psychological. We have the remnants of the reptilian brain in us. We have very, very much the remnants of ancient mammalian activities and expressions, and we also have the modern cortex. So we are the species that is biological, social, and psychological. The reptilian brain, youngster, has what I would call it is a substrate for an intelligence which is reactive. Very, very important here, and we actually need this. The crocodile is not interested in democracy. You don't have to go too far to look at some of the outstanding individuals in South African politics, let alone world politics, to understand what we're speaking about now in terms of an orientation. And this is the point I really want to make here. This is not going to go away. Every one of us is subject to the same pull of territoriality, because crocodiles are fiercely territorial. We have our territory. And we given half an opportunity, but we would like as much as possible, and we want it. No, thank you very much indeed, okay? And sometimes, we don't take kindly to the criticisms which come our way. That is all ancient, and it's necessary. Why? Because it's ultimately about self-preservation. It is ultimately about the fact that you and I have to be kind, because every single living thing is fighting a fierce battle. That battle is called survival. So, we're not just a reptilian creature. We now have ancient mammalian influences in our whole systems. And we go up the scale just a little to the ancient, but critically, kinship recognition. That we know our kind. It is the beginnings of in-groups and out-groups, which is critical for social survival. And the point of it all here is that these in-groups, while they are critical, have a very, very dark side to it. And the dark side of the in-group, out-group, is when the out-group becomes an enemy. And what I would like to show, simply because it's part of a changing mindset that is absolutely necessary, is that we have to understand that ethnicity, compounded by languages, belief systems, rituals, and all of that, xenophobia, even a little word about that, will never ever go away. It's going to need a very conscious individual in a position to be able to say, no, I do not go down that road anymore. And as I say, this is the dark side of something which is hugely positive. Here, for example, we have an in-group. There's no getting away from it. People who arrived here for this conference with similar ideas, similar visions. We might have different ways of saying it, but we recognize each other by the way that we agree. We recognize each other by the way that we speak, the contents of what we're speaking about. This is the importance of the palomammalian brain, is that kinship recognition, social survival, and believe it or not, the beginnings of fair play. The beginnings of fair play. What is fair? What feels good and what isn't so good? And I think you'll agree with me today that we don't have to be too clever to realize that in this country, rather ominously I'm afraid at the moment, is that a lot of the strikes which we're seeing at the moment, this is not about wages. This is about a deep sense of something that is very, very unfair. And we know that, and because of it, you can't measure where this is actually going to go. So this is intrinsic to the human system, and then eventually you get to the neocortex here. And the neocortex, as I said, this is the part of the human brain that gives us our personality characteristics. It allows us to sequence. But most importantly, and this is what is crucial, is that the neocortex is that part of the human system, the human brain, that allows us to say no. So if I were to ask you, please, what do you think the definition is of free will? What do you think the true definition is of freedom of speech? You would probably come up with a number of answers which are plausible, but I would like to suggest that the most important quality, the most important ability, and the most important acceptability is the freedom to say no. And as we say no, there's a paradox here. As we say no, we're also saying yes to something else. So as agents of change, as we look at the whole construct, the whole theme of this particular conference, Agents of change, change agents. What many of us are really doing here is we've come here to say no. Come here to say no to lifestyles that we know have to change. And what we're going to discover, very, very rudely, that we are all, even us sitting in this room here, by the way, are resistant to that kind of change. Why? Because we're addicted to our own lifestyles. That we'll discuss on Friday, but it is another critical blind spot. And so, be thankful for the crocodile in you. This creature here has survived over 200 million years. It can grow teeth up to 40 different sets in its lifetime. It can go underwater it can go underwater for 45 minutes. That particular crocodile can go without food for 2 years. They handle asteroids, they handle all kinds of climate change. They're not going to worry too much about it. The crocodile is alive and well in us. It is the crocodile that's responsible for what I call the reactive intelligence, that ability to get yourself out of trouble very, very quickly. You and me, it introduced delayed gratification. I will stand back a little while, and only later, do I need my particular turn. And then, finally, we have the neocortex. The neocortex, as I say, gives us not only that ability to say no, it gives us the ability to understand that the individuality that every single one of us in this room see is impossible outside of relationships. Okay? This picture here, taken in 1989, to me is a colossal picture. You might call that individual there, or tank man, as he's sometimes referred to, as crazy. What did he do? This, believe it or not, was in the Avenue of Peace, just outside Tiananmen Square. He broke ranks, he was a student, and he went and he brought a rolling halt 4 great big tanks. Heaven only knows whatever happened to this particular man. But this picture demonstrates to me something absolutely critical. This is a picture of a metaphor of the human neocortex. That ability of an individual to say no. Go and stand in front of tanks to be able to say to a system, I haven't come to destroy the system, to actually ask it to stop. But there's something which is far, far more critical, even in that external action. That individual standing there is a representation of the neocortex and its fragility. That every single day of our lives, we are in this particular position. So what am I saying? I'm saying it every day in our lives. You and I have to stand in front of the very, very powerful ancient mammalian and reptilian drives in every single one of us as individuals. But I want it all, and I want it now, and I want as much as possible. But I don't like being criticized, I like to have things my own way, which is very, very democratic. But I am part of an in-group, and therefore the out-group of this and that and the other. Have a look. What degree can we stand in front of our own ancestry and say, no? And remember, by saying no to these powerful drives, we're also saying yes to what's immensely positive about these particular drives. And once we can do that, once we can really say, wait a minute, I have a very, very powerful ancestry. We are incredibly privileged to be what I like to refer to as the human animal. Only then can we really then begin to see the value of relationships. And so, as I bring this presentation to a close, we now turn around to see how we make this practical. Maybe never again, in terms of an understanding of your individuality being impossible outside relationships, may you never again talk about an elephant, unless you can also speak just a little about the food and the grasses that it eats. But you may never again be able to talk about a single animal without its relationship to other animals. May we always be aware of the immensity of the human shadow on our environment and of the immense responsibilities we have of being a voice for the other creatures which do not have a voice. That there is a critical distance between human beings and wild animals, and that it is possible to coexist with other species, and that we live in a web of life. I will end with this poem by Carl Sandburg. And Carl Sandburg wrote this poem in 1918. He wrote it a long, long time before the unraveling of the human genome, and as I said, this amazing discovery of how we are bound through the biological language of DNA to every single living thing. This is what he said. There's a wolf in me. Fangs pointed for tearing gashes, and a red tongue for the hot lapping of blood. The wilderness gave it to me, and the wilderness will not let it go. There's a hog in me, a machinery for eating and drinking, a machinery for sleeping, satisfied, snorting in the sun. There is a fox in me, I know. I sniff, and I guess, and I double-cross. The wilderness told me so. There's a fish in me, I know. I come from soft blue water gates. I swam with shoals of herrings. I blew water spouts with whales and porpoises long before land, long before Noah, long before that first chapter in Genesis. And the wilderness told me so. There's a baboon in me, hairy under the armpits, ready to sing and to give milk, just waiting. There's an owl and an eagle and a mockingbird. Ah, says Sternberg, I put a menagerie beneath my ribs and under my bony skull and in my red valve heart. And I've got something else. It is a man-child heart, a woman-child heart, a father and a brother and a lover. Comes from God knows where, goes to God knows where, but I am the keeper of the zoo. I sing and I kill and I work. I say yes and no. I am a pearl of the world, and I come from the wilderness. Thank you.
I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, and I'm a mother. I'm a human, which comes from humane, referring to our more noble or benevolent aspects, which I fear many of us have forgotten. I live with all of you on this wondrous planet, our home, our only home, where everything is connected, interconnected. And all was balanced so perfectly to allow us to evolve in this intricate web of life, this dance of diversity. Yet in my short life, and okay, I'm not so young, but relative to the 14 billion years of evolution, if that was the Big Bang, then a cell on this fingernail is where we are now. Relative to that, my life is pretty short. But in my lifetime, the population has more than doubled, and I have journeyed through over 30 countries and seen with my own eyes how we have destroyed landscapes, how we've poisoned our rivers, polluted our deepest seas, chopped down our oldest forests, and contaminated the very air that we breathe. Our only home is sick, and worse, many of our 7 billion and fast-growing family are suffering. We have fiddled with the knobs of the Holocene, that 10,000-year period of climate stability that birthed civilization. We have diverted nearly a third of Earth's available fresh water to planting monocultures, and we graze nearly half of the land surface. We are conducting a dangerous experiment, kind of like the evil archetypes we see in superhero films. And now we live in the Anthropocene, the present geological era, from the time of the Industrial Revolution until today, during which humanity has begun to have a significant impact on the environment. This is a geological age of mankind's making. And how's that working out for us? Well, the more carbon pollution we put into the atmosphere, the more we change our climate and risk our extreme weather events. From the 1880s, when we started measuring temperature, we can certainly see that temperatures are rising. 9 of the 10 warmest years ever have occurred since 2000, with 2010 being so far the hottest ever recorded, although 2012 may well exceed that. This is causing floods to increase. Here the water went up to the 4th story of this high-rise. And last year in Australia, an area larger than the size of France and Germany combined flooded in Australia, but this year they had an echo of those massive floods. This is India just a few months ago. And droughts. Droughts are devastating. Right now in the Horn of Africa, more than 18 million people are at risk of food shortages due to extended and repeated droughts. And China has been experiencing severe droughts over the last few years. This used to be their largest lake. And where there's drought, there's very often fire. Fires that are spreading widely, burning longer, and much hotter. You may remember the extreme drought and heat in Russia in 2010 that set the stage for terrible fires that burned across most of Central Europe, Asia, and 58,000 people died of carbon monoxide poisoning and smoke. The Russians then took their grain off the market, which caused 4 months later a food price spike. And now food prices are peaking once again, reaching a record high in August, possibly in part because of the severe drought and the extended fires in the United States. And in just the first half of this year, hundreds of millions of people around the world were affected by exceptional drought. This is the reality. We cannot pretend that this is not happening. And storms are getting more destructive, from China to Texas. Species are dying. Economies are collapsing. We have oil spills and pollution in our air and water. Our current energy policies don't take costs to the environment into account. You can't just dump sewage into the street. So why do we act like carbon pollution is different? We're just treating the atmosphere like an open sewer. And our thirst for oil and dependence on fossil fuels is fueling conflict. We are devolving into depraved behavior. And so, especially as a mother, but as a deeply concerned citizen of Earth, I know we have to change. The world as we know it is at an end. Don't wait for the 21st of December 2012. It is upon us. It's time to accept the mantle of responsibility that comes with the coming of age. We need to take responsibility for our every thought, our every word, and our every action. Well, in my personal journey, I accepted this when, after fleeing apartheid, I returned to South Africa in 1990 when our country was going through rebirth to start Food and Trees for Africa. I realized then that one can make a change. The social enterprise has now grown from me and my garage to 60 people working towards healthy people on a healthier planet. And I've been absolutely amazed at what we can achieve. So I started with trees. Culture food gardens, which we introduced into the country for poor people. Hectares of bamboo and other biomass planted, and now organic farms springing up in our new program, Feed Africa, Farmer Eco Enterprise Development. We launched the very first South African carbon calculator online in 2006 when Al Gore made it popular to think about climate change, although that's how we started in 1990. We also launched a Moby calculator, the Carbon Protocol, and the Climate Hero Awards. The Climate Hero Awards are now entering their 4th year, and these recognize, reward, and motivate individuals, communities, schools, companies, and cities that are climate change agents. We're now launching the 2012, 2013, 2014, in fact I'm launching it right here and now. But change does need funding, so if any of you out there want to be the one to help us make this change, please see me later. Most importantly though, we have planted millions of seeds in minds and hearts. that a sprouting consciousness around what we are doing, what we need to do, and how we can save ourselves from, as my good friend Kumi Naidoo, one of my heroes and the first African head of Greenpeace, says, we are sleepwalking into a disaster of unmitigated proportion, where our children and theirs will pay the price of our greed, our ignorance, and our inability to change. Yet people around the world are realizing this. If William Kamkwamba, a 14-year-old Malawian, can build a working wind turbine, first to power his own house and then eventually his whole village, then surely the rest of us can find some solutions. For those of you interested, there's a fabulous book on this young man called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and he's now an MIT student. We've been far too pessimistic about renewable energy, and projections have now been far exceeded. Wind is blowing energy all over the world. When India first announced this ambitious plan, there was a lot of skepticism, but now it looks like they too will blow way past their own goals. China leading the way in the manufacture and installation of wind turbines. Nearly 3/4 of all of their clean energy investments are now wind. And in the United States, wind power has been the largest source of renewable electricity over each of the last several years. But there's also an incredible future for solar. The market is now growing at about 7 times the predicted pace. Did you know that every single hour, enough solar energy hits the Earth to meet the world's energy demands for a year? And here in South Africa, we have all of this available to us. In North Africa, this ambitious supergrid hopes to take solar energy not just down to sub-Saharan Africa, but into Europe as well. The Vatican's made a commitment to be the first carbon neutral city and country, actually, on the planet. And they have 2 really important things going for them. They're a small country, and they have God on their side. The story of solutions includes the smart grid, which makes electricity distribution far more efficient, and super high-speed trains in many parts of the world are helping. Geothermal power plants, amazing. They harness the heat of the earth to provide clean energy. And here, Iceland's leading the way. And then we can't forget carbon sinks in land and oceans. Nearly 60% of carbon pollution emitted by humans over the last 50 years has been sunk that way. But farmers can increase carbon sequestration. It's a new exciting thing we're looking into is soil carbon. By minimizing soil disturbance and by more sustainable agriculture and farming practices. We also must remember to eat less meat. A very inefficient use of resources. And then back to what I love, if I can get there, the trees. China is taking important and ambitious steps. In China, every single person has to plant 3 trees every single year. And in India, massive school programs, as we do here. We are all in this together. And what is really important are the choices that we make. I urge all of you to be the one to make the difference, to cultivate your compassion, and as Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. Because this here is the only earth that we will ever have, the only earth that we will ever love, or touch, or tend, for our children and for theirs. The time for action is right now. So folks, whilst most of our governments are MIA and corporate greed continues to rape and pillage planet's resources, and many slumber on unconsciously, can we here at Sustain Our Africa agree? We are the change agents, and together we can make the necessary changes to avoid more suffering so that we can have enough for all forever. And I just want to end with something. This month, I spent a week with 180 children from 60 schools across South Africa, 60 schools that are the top permaculture and greening schools in the country, through a program that I founded in 1994 called EduPlant. This was the 19th EduPlant. It was a program founded to improve the lives of children, but also the health of communities and environments. And just like Suzuki, the young girl who addressed the United Nations at the first Earth Summit, pleaded with the world, if you don't know how to fix it, please don't break it. These children are pleading with us now.
Go and tell your neighbor. Go and tell your mother. Go and tell your brother. Go and tell your father. The heavens are rising.
Culture food gardens, which we introduced into the country for poor people. Hectares of bamboo and other biomass planted, and now organic farms springing up in our new program, Feed Africa, Farmer Eco Enterprise Development. We launched the very first South African carbon calculator online in 2006 when Al Gore made it popular to think about climate change, although that's how we started in 1990. We also launched a Moby calculator, the Carbon Protocol, and the Climate Hero Awards. The Climate Hero Awards are now entering their 4th year, and there, yes. And these recognize, reward, and motivate individuals, communities, schools, companies, and cities that are climate change agents. We're now launching the 2013, 2014, in fact I'm launching it right here and now, but change does need funding, so if any of you out there want to be the one to help us make this change, please see me later. Most importantly though, we have planted millions of seeds in minds and hearts that are sprouting consciousness around what we are doing, what we need to do, and how we can save ourselves from, as my good friend Kumi Naidoo, one of my heroes and the first African head of Greenpeace, says, we are sleepwalking into a disaster of unmitigated proportion, where our children and theirs will pay the price of our greed, our ignorance, and our inability to change. Yet people around the world are realizing this. If William Kamkwamba, a 14-year-old Malawian, can build a working wind turbine, first to power his own house and then eventually his whole village, then surely the rest of us can find some solutions. For those of you interested, there's a fabulous book on this young man called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and he's now an MIT student. We've been far too pessimistic about renewable energy, and projections have now been far exceeded. Wind is blowing energy all over the world. When India first announced this ambitious plan, there was a lot of skepticism, but now it looks like they too will blow way past their own goals. China leading the way in the manufacture and installation of wind turbines. Nearly 3/4 of all of their clean energy investments are now wind. And in the United States, wind power has been the largest source of renewable electricity over each of the last several years. But there's also an incredible future for solar. The market is now growing at about 7 times the predicted pace. Did you know that every single hour, enough solar energy hits the Earth to meet the world's energy demands for a year? And here in South Africa, we have all of this available to us. Sorry guys. And in North Africa, this ambitious supergrid hopes to take solar energy not just down to sub-Saharan Africa, but into Europe as well. The Vatican's made a commitment to be the first carbon neutral city and country, actually, on the planet. And they have 2 really important things going for them. They're a small country, and they have God on their side.
And money.
Yeah, money.
The story of solutions includes the smart grid, which makes electricity distribution far more efficient, and super high-speed trains in many parts of the world are helping. Geothermal power plants, amazing. They harness the heat of the earth to provide clean energy. And here, Iceland's leading the way. And then we can't forget carbon sinks in land and oceans. Nearly 60% of carbon pollution emitted by humans over the last 50 years has been sunk that way. But farmers can increase carbon sequestration. It's a new exciting thing we're looking into is soil carbon by minimizing soil disturbance and by more sustainable agriculture and farming practices. We also must remember to eat less meat, a very inefficient use of resources. And then back to what I love, if I can get there, the trees. China is taking important and ambitious steps. In China, every single person has to plant 3 trees every single year. And in India, massive school programs as we do here. So, I know you're all hungry and I'm battling with technology. In the end, we are all in this together. And what is really important are the choices that we make. I urge all of you to be the one to make the difference, to cultivate your compassion, and as Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. Because this here is the only earth that we will ever have, the only earth that we will ever love, or touch, or tend, for our children and for theirs. The time for action is right now. So folks, whilst most of our governments are MIA and corporate greed continues to rape and pillage planet's resources, and many slumber on unconsciously, can we here at Sustain Our Africa agree? We are the change agents, and together we can make the necessary changes to avoid more suffering so that we can have enough for all forever. And I just want to end with something. This month, I spent a week with 180 children from 60 schools across South Africa, 60 schools that are the top permaculture and greening schools in the country, through a program that I founded in 1994 called EduPlant. This was the 19th EduPlant. It was a program founded to improve the lives of children, but also the health of communities and environments. And just like Suzuki, the young girl who addressed the United Nations at the first Earth Summit, pleaded with the world, if you don't know how to fix it, please don't break it. These children are pleading with us now. Oh, you think you can make that happen at the back for me, please?
Now, listen, learn, and help us to spread this message. Go and tell your neighbor, politician. Go and tell your neighbor, politician. Go and tell your neighbor, politician. Give them Sawatina, politician. Go and tell your mother, politician. Go and tell your brother, politician. Go and tell your father, politician. Give them Sawatina, politician.
Or for an hour, is can restoring our environment restore our economy? And I looked at this and I thought, in this particular room containing the choir of the converted, I'm not convinced that we're going to, we're all going to say yes, of course, green is good and strong environment is a strong economy and all of that. And so what I'm going to encourage our panelists to do, and encourage you with your questions as well, is to wrestle with how do we actually make that happen? And how do we, in the context of a country and an economy that is based on free market capitalism and all the good things that does bring us, how do we put a brake on development or angle development in a way that is sometimes means that people might have to act against their short-term interests. And being something of an evolutionary biologist, I have a very, very dim view in our species' ability to do that, certainly on the community scale, but I encourage you to prove me horribly wrong and show me what a miserable cynic I am at the age of 36. But I also want, before we start, I want us to be very, very clear in our minds who it is who is sitting in this room. I came across an astonishing website yesterday, called globalrichlist.com. globalrichlist.com. You're absolutely welcome to have a look at it now while we're beginning to go. What it is a way of ranking yourself against all the other people in the world according to how much you make. So I want you to think about that and maybe rank yourself on that rank as we begin to get going. And think very, very clearly about who it is in this room, who is in this room when we're starting to talk about the way that we should move our economies forward. Joining me on the panel today is Marvin Benjamin, who is the City Region Account Executive for Siemens. Very lovely. Give them away. There we go. Thank you. Cormac Cullinan, who we've already met today, and is environmental lawyer extraordinaire, and also the current holder of the Nick Steele Award for environmental performance. Well done, Cormac. We've got Paul Clements Hunt, who is the head of UNEP. No, sorry. What are you the head of? The head of the
Yes.
Yes.
No, I'm not the head of UNEP. I worked at UNEP for 12 years and I now have left a few months ago to set up an investment company.
There you go. He was a United Nations chap, he's now a banker.
Well, maybe I have just been made the head of UNEP, which is fine.
You never know. Treat it now. We have, Paul's not Jonathan. No, Jonathan Hanks, who heads the corporate environmental divisions of ESCOM and the AECI.
No, not quite.
No.
ESCOM and AECI weren't like that. I run a small company called Insight Sustainability.
I must admit, as I read it, I thought you definitely moved in pace. And Nimala Nair, who is now, hopefully I'll get this one right, because I've got all the others wrong, is a sustainability advocate and director of Zero Emissions Research. There we go. All right, so the way it's going to work, I'm going to give each of our panelists 3 minutes. They are going to give you an overview of what they think about this link between environment and the economy. We're going to keep them moving fairly quickly.
Thank you, I've got 3 minutes. So let me jump into it like this. It's a no-brainer. Yes, restoring and rejuvenating the environment is a fundamental building block to the economy going forward. Some key questions. If you break down capital and investment and identify where the pools of capital are, at a really $1 trillion scale, it's very clear. $80 trillion in the bond markets, $55 trillion in equity markets. Keep breaking it down. Really interesting one is 10 million people who controlled $22 trillion in 2000. 10 years on, control $47 trillion. That's the rich and super rich. But these are very defined pools of capital. The key question in terms of whether we get the balance between economy and environment right, how is that capital invested? What does it expect in terms of return? Some would argue that anything beyond 8% return is unsustainable. So your 15.4% every year from Bernie Madoff, the great fraudster, is unsustainable. Your 20 to 40% for private equity is unsustainable. Your 60% from certain hedge funds is unsustainable. So the questions are, how will the capital be mobilized? How will it be put into productive projects, into communities? What is the expectation? And the real fly in the ointment in terms of investment is this overwhelming dominance of short-termism. Because if you're short-term, you want your return quickly, and your return is often unsustainable. Look, I'm being a bit tabloid here, but I want to put some key thoughts out there. Huge inequality, 10 million people controlling 47.2 trillion, that's more than 25% of global financial assets. How will that income be played out? Our bond markets, huge. The debt markets, which build cities, which put infrastructure into place, they're only just beginning to green. They're only just beginning to think about it. Okay? So again, I would ask the audience, how do those pools of capital, how are they deployed, where are they put, what's the timing, what's the expectation? Have I got a minute left?
You've got 39 seconds.
35, okay. Look, after I ran a partnership between the UN and finance for 12 years, I've gone back into business. It's not meant to be cynical, and I'm not capitalist or banker bashing. The system is broken, it is rigged, it is ultra short term. When you have capital markets which think in terms of 300 milliseconds, in terms of how high frequency traders play into a market and their computers play out, it's just wrong. And that's more than 70% of the trading that now takes place on US capital markets. It's algorithmic, it's high frequency trading, it's not about humans, it's about machines, right? So the system is bugged, broken, rigged. But the question for those big pools of capital, for the pensioners, who controls pension funds worldwide? Whose money is it? It's teachers, it's firemen, it's nurses, it's policemen, it's regular folk, it's teachers. Those players have got to take control of their capital again and be vocal about how it's deployed. And then you can get balance between return, timing, the economy, and the environment. Complex, difficult, but we need to move the capital in the right way over the long term to get a result.
Excellent. Paul, I'm going to stop you there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I came across a few interesting quotes recently from very well-known people. Nelson Mandela once spoke about how difficult things can be and realizing how easy they were once they've been done. Albert Einstein spoke about how we have to apply new ways of thinking to solve problems. So the point he was making is that you cannot apply the same form of thinking to a certain challenge. And then there was a certain German engineer and economist who made a statement that goes, "I will not sell the future for short-term gain." And this is a person, somebody once told me the story, who had his life threatened around the height of the Industrial Revolution because he started conversations about what we today know as medical cover. He started conversations about what we today know as pension cover. And I worked for the organization that this person started. His name was Werner von Siemens. And this company, grand company, did a study some years ago that looked at some massive shifts that are taking place in the world, the so-called megatrends, urbanization being one of them. And I think we all know the data about what percentage of the world population will be living in cities by which year. The point is, more people are entering our cities faster. Globalization is another megatrend. And I'm sure we also know about the foreign direct investment that's been increasing on our continent in the previous decades. Climate change. The statistic I like to talk about is when our world reaches the point of an average increase in temperature of 2 degrees, some Pacific islands are already underwater. The other one is demographic change. People are getting older, and if one reflects on the South African scenario, Census 1996 tells us that there were just over 1.5 million people aged 65 and over in South Africa. The trend indicates that by the year 2032, that 1.5 million becomes just past the 3 million mark. Demand for healthcare costs are rising. And so all of these things, all of these massive shifts taking place in the world carry implications for how we move forward. And our organization has adopted a stance, we've embedded this in our strategy, to say we will be one of the companies that will stand up and be counted among those who are contributing to answering the tough questions of this era. Thank you.
Well, seeing as to respond to your suggestion that maybe we're all going to agree, maybe I should try and stir the pot a bit. Because one of the things that struck me when I looked at the topic, can restoring the environment save our economy, was I'm not sure that I'm that cared about saving our economy. And I'm not sure when we say our economy, whose economy are we talking about? Because as you said in your introduction, this is an economy that does not work for the vast majority of humankind. I mean, percentage-wise, it doesn't work very well for almost everybody. And it's not that I don't think that gainful employment and having jobs, etc., is important. I just think that the economy is not the point. We should be saving people. We should be saving ecosystems. That's what we really want. The economy is some kind of inaccurate proxy for these things. So what I think is important is that, as the Buddhists say, even the smallest thing wants to live. And we all want to live, and we want to live well. And somewhere along the line, the idea of human development, the idea of maybe moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so you look after your food, your shelter, etc. first, and then as you sort out those problems, you can develop yourself as a full human being. That's what development means to me. That kind of development makes sense to me. And somehow the concept of development got shifted from human development to building roads and infrastructure, which may or may not help people. The other thing is that we somehow got into measuring our economy in a very strange way. We got obsessed not even with the economy, but with the growth of the economy measured in GDP terms. Now what that means is if you go and spend a lot of money degrading a wetland, and then that increases the GDP, so that's counted as good growth. And then if you have to spend the money again repairing it, that also increases the GDP. And quite frankly, that's just mad. So what I think we need to do is focus on the fact of the real indicators that we really want. We want people to be able to enhance their own well-being over time and to see human development. We need better indicators for that. And those are the things that are worth fighting for. If that means that we have a thriving economy, which we should if we look after those things, well and good. But the economy is not an end in itself, in my view. It's a means to an end, and we would do better by focusing on what we really want. More well-being, more development, more democracy, more rights. And when you talk about jobs, not just more jobs, it depends what kind of jobs. It doesn't help us. We're sitting up in the branches of this great tree of life, and we're paying people to create jobs to cut down the tree that we're sitting on. We don't need any jobs like that. It depends on what kind of jobs. So I think that let's get our ducks in a row and put economy second to what really counts, which is people's well-being, human development, and the health of our planet as a whole.
Thanks.
But how'd you do it? 3 minutes back.
It'll be the first question that comes.
Sorry.
There's a question that you're being asked, and you're going to ask. You've been asked to vote on. Is can we restore our economy by restoring our environment? And I'm going to take a slightly different approach and argue no. I think the environment is important as a building block, but if we read the idea of restoring our economy, which is to meet the manifesto you have here, enough for all forever, if that's our objective, that's how we see a restored economy. If we focus exclusively on the environment, we are not going to get enough for all forever. And I'm very worried that we are a group of environmentalists who are seeking to get the change that we need by focusing exclusively on the environment. I think that's going to be self-defeating. I don't think it's going to get the transition that I think we collectively need. And for me, that's a concern. Now, let's be absolutely clear. The environment is going to be fundamental to a just transition, a just change. But if we rely on it exclusively, it's not going to be the transition that we need. And that, I think, is of profound concern. What I think we need to do collectively is to acknowledge the systemic nature of the problem. We have a system that is ultimately dependent upon constant physical growth. It's dependent on growth, and it's dependent upon access to debt. We are seeing a systemic change currently. We need to address that systemic change. We need to address head-on this obsession with constant physical growth. We need to acknowledge and internalize the cost of natural capital. But if we do that at the expense of human and social capital, we are going to address the environmental challenge that faces us. And if it becomes an environmental issue versus a social issue, a green versus red issue, then I think collectively the social justice we're looking for won't be realized. And I'm worried that that's what's happening in this country. It becomes almost a color issue, green and white, red and black. And I think that's something which we need to head up to, right up front. Now, let me share a small anecdote. A colleague of mine was chairing a dinner with some thought leaders. And in the room was one of the top economists in this country, very well-known person. And he said, in response to how do we restore the economy, we need to do two things, he said. He said, firstly, we need to reduce the price of energy. And secondly, we need to increase population growth. So, yeah, no, oh gosh, exactly. Now here's a man that actually is going to take us, I think, completely in the wrong direction at full speed. But that's where I think many mainstream economists are at. How do we promote economic growth? we would increase consumption, and we externalize costs. Those are the issues that we need to address. I'm going to end with the final thought from Adam Smith, who the free marketeers often forget was a moral philosopher. And he said, economies will eventually reach a stationary state when they have acquired that full complement of riches which the nature of its soil and climate allowed it to acquire, which could therefore advance not further, and which was not going backwards. Soil and climate are going to be the limits to economic growth. But unless we bring in social justice issues, we're not going to get the transition that we need. Thank you.
Okay, economy or environment. I'm going to step out of both of those camps, and I'm going to say that...
So, Nimona, can you talk nicely?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear? I'm going to step out of the both economy and environment bandwagon, and I would say that we need to start looking at an inward process. You know, when we talk about sustainability, it has become a kind of a sustainability industry, and it's continuously going outward. It's an externalization of all our problems. And for me, until and unless we are able to look inward and start looking at our own inner processes, how are we going to internalize some of the issues and start changing our decision-making process of how do we want to sustain life. That takes us a bit closer to us as change agents. So we are making decisions whether we want to support the kind of mainstream consumption-oriented sustainability services and industry, or do we want to become change agents in a way that we want both our regenerative ecosystems and an economic growth with a baseline of social justice. And that's something which we have actually fallen, because we are polarizing the issues. Economy, environment, environment, economy, and in between, who falls? The minority, the larger minority who can't afford to sit in these kind of forums and then talk about these kind of discussions. So I would say that so far, we know very well that the kind of economy that we are driving now and wanting to sustain is being driven by, as Ian said, is Ian around, with our reptilian brain. It is driven by the reptilian brain of control and ego and ownership and private property and profit, you name it. And then we throw in the pot a little bit of a sustaining the green or the blue or whatever and make a poichikos of the whole thing. And then we assuage our guilt. I mean, Jason talked about trading on the piss and the poo. How many of you clean your own toilets here? I mean, we will trade piss and poo in the stock market. And we will have all kinds of gadgets designed to separate. But none of us here in this room probably ever cleaned the toilets. And Mahatma Gandhi once said, my time is sticking out, he had a big fight even with Kasturba. He made everybody in the Gandhi ashram clean their toilets. We got to actually start practicing the lifestyle changes that will take us further and further and start questioning how many of us are driving some of these SUV gas-guzzling monsters with our cycles lagging behind with a neon-clad cycle outfit and then talking about mobility and transport. I mean, let's cut the crap out and then let's see what we can actually do practically. We need the economy and we need the environment, we need the ecosystem which is regenerative and self-sustaining. Thank you. Sorry, attaining energetics of the life force. That's what a self is about. And nobody here has ever raised the issue or the debate about the self.
Whether it's policy or legislation or regulatory, there's a lot of smart stuff that can be done to control unfettered greed, right, period. And it's not casting blame. Our politicians and policymakers themselves suffer from short-termism, right? So I think there are certain things that can be done. Let me put it out there. With due respect to my fellow panelists and everyone in the room, the sustainability, economic, social development movement over the last 20-25 years have been expert at imploding and destroying themselves. Because we go to conferences, we say, the planet is ending, it's a nightmare, and the conversation is circular for 25, 30 years. And it might even go back to the 1972 Human Development Conference in Stockholm. We have to change this discussion, right? We cannot go around shouting at people saying the world is about to end, change yourself. And no disrespect to you, we have to change the discussion or we will lose it. And we've got to focus on solutions. That's why Jason was so inspirational last night. We've got to also think about solutions that we can replicate and move at scale and play within the reality of our current political systems, because there is no environment. Last point here, if you haven't looked at it, Jeremy Grantham runs a $90 billion investment fund in New York. He every quarter puts out a letter to his investors. The one from August of this year was Welcome to Dystopia. You've got a hard-nosed investor who takes all of our issues and looks at them and comes up with a very, very depressing future for the current investment community. We have got to start thinking about solutions. We can't continue this discussion.
What we're dealing with at the moment in the climate change world is what I would categorize as a very, very difficult allocations process. And in order to explain what I mean by an allocations process, I think that the best thing I can do is to tell you, give it to you in the form of a parable. I work a lot with very scientific people who do modeling, and they always say that I sound evangelical when I do this, so I'm going to actually tell you a parable. The nicest way in my mind to understand an allocations process is to think about two phrases that I read about recently in some papers. The one is the cowboy economy, and the other one is the astronaut economy. So I'll use the cowboy economy as my parallel, my parable rather. You need to imagine, in a sense, the large plains of Wyoming or Iowa or whatever, some few hundred years back, and 40 or so cowboy families with their horses and carts and so on arrive on this.
People are already feeling financially squeezed, then that's a recipe for big problems. So I see increasing starvation, I see increasing poverty, and I see increasing conflict deriving from these things. And actually, those are all health issues. Health around the world has always been driven by poverty and starvation and conflict, not just by malaria and diarrheal disease and so forth. Things that we concentrate on CO2, of course, but there are a whole raft of greenhouse gases, some of which are released in vastly smaller concentrations of CO2, but that have very, very much greater warming effects. So some of them are measured in thousands of times the warming potential of CO2. Methane